some of the best railroading in the world, the CSX New River subdivision. But for the most part, what you see on the New River is the same CSX engines hauling the same coal cars, going to the same mines over and over and over again. And I like that, don't get me wrong, I really do. It's fun to see a coal train just running up and down here. I'll never complain about getting a coal train. But every now and then you get something that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see, or that you just don't see very often along the New River. And that's what we're talking about in this episode. The term for this is foreign power. And when I say foreign power, I don't necessarily mean locomotives from other countries, although that can be a thing. The best way to explain foreign power is with an example. So here along the CSX, foreign power is any non-CSX locomotive pulling a CSX train. It's a CSX crew in that cab, just not a CSX engine. How does this work? Well, at some point along the route, usually up in Chicago for the trains we get down here, these trains that originate on other railroads are given to CSX. And when they get there, CSX has the option to take its foreign engines off and then put CSX engines on the train. But quite frankly, it's easier to just keep those foreign engines on. It speeds up the time in which the train gets over the railroad because you can have a crew ready for it, but if you take time to take the engines off and put new ones back on, that's time that train could be moving down the line. So what they do is railroads keep track of how many hours these foreign locomotives are on their railroad. And every so often, I think it's monthly, it might not be, it might be every 3 months or something like that, but every so often they will tabulate them up, and then how they do it is they pay each other back, either by running their locomotives on other railroads' trains or paying them cash. So an example would be here along the New River, if a train gets into Chicago from the Canadian National. Well, if they run those CN locomotives all the way down to North Carolina, then CSX will keep track of how many hours those CN units were under power on the property. And then at the end of the month, or however long it is, they will go, okay, CN, we owe you, let's just say 1,000 horsepower hours is how they calculate it. Across the whole system, not just for the New River. And then CN will go, okay, well, we can run your engines on our trains for equal amount of hours, or if there's any left over, we'll just take cash from you as a payback for using our locomotives to pull your train. It really is that simple. And the thing about it is, all of these engines are pretty much the exact same on the inside. The only difference is those Canadian units may have French instructions in the cab for Canadian railroaders to speak French. That's it. If you're qualified to run over a certain section of railroad, there's no reason you can't take a train with a Union Pacific engine or a CSX engine or a BNSF engine or whatever over this railroad. There's no reason you couldn't do that. So it's really about simplicity and efficiency that foreign power exists. So with that, let's take a look at every Class 1 railroad in this country, outside CSX of course, because this already is CSX, operating in West Virginia.
The Union Pacific Railroad is the oldest Class 1 railroad in the country. A Class 1 is defined as a railroad that earns over $250 million in revenue per year. The UP traces its origins all the way back to Abraham Lincoln and the Pacific Railroad Act. Mr. Lincoln signed the act in 1862, and a year later, Union Pacific was building west from Council Bluffs, Iowa, to meet Central Pacific, building east from Sacramento, California. The two met in Promontory, Utah, and on May 10, 1869, the Golden Spike was driven, forever linking east and west. Today, UP still operates over much of the original route, which it calls the Overland Route. In 1996, the route became entirely Union Pacific property following the merger with Central Pacific's successor, Southern Pacific. Every now and then we see Union Pacific locomotives on the New River. Several times in 2023 they visited on military trains, including this one in Thurmond. This train isn't hauling tanks or anything like that. It doesn't look like a military train, but I assure you it is. Here's another military train in September 2023, again in Thurmond, and again with Union Pacific locomotives pulling. While we have a second, let's talk about those first 4 cars behind the engines. Those aren't part of the shipments. That's what's called buffer cars. Those cars are partially filled with something to give them a little bit of weight, and they're there to protect the train crew from what's behind them in case something really bad happens along the way. BNSF was formed in 1995 as a merger between the Burlington Northern and the Santa Fe. BNSF is the largest railroad in the country by track miles, with just over 33,000 miles owned. Fittingly for fall, BNSF engines are nicknamed pumpkins by rail fans for their orange paint. Here's a pair of pumpkins leading Norfolk Southern Train 54J in Oakville, West Virginia. One of the most surefire bets for foreign power on New River is train B261, molten sulfur loads all the way from Alberta, Canada to North Carolina by way of West Virginia. These trains usually carry Canadian national locomotives and occasionally something quite notable. We'll view two examples of B261, starting with one from April 2024 with a regular CN locomotive, plus one that was once owned by CityRail, a subsidiary of Citibank. These locomotives were sold to CN back in 2015 and for some reason still have not been repainted. In August 2024, we got another B261 with some really rare visitors, two British Columbian locomotives from BC Rail. Without making things too complicated, basically CN leases operations from BC Rail, including these locomotives. BC Rail technically owns them, but CN can use them for pretty much whatever they want, including letting them venture really far from home. In April 2023, we have what is expected to be the last merger of Class 1 railroads, with the merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern to create Canadian Pacific Kansas City, with CPKC. We haven't seen any CPKC painted locomotives here yet, so here's a train being led by a Canadian Pacific locomotive first. This is an ethanol train bound for, I believe, Tampa. Take note of that second locomotive. That's what we call a gray ghost, and it was actually on the roster of KCS de Mexico, a Mexican subsidiary of KCS. That's right, a Mexican locomotive in West Virginia. Never thought I'd see the day. Just a few months before the CPKC merger became official, I caught this Kansas City Southern locomotive leading another ethanol train in Thurmond. This locomotive wears the famous Southern Belle paint scheme that KCS had. This harkens back to a scheme the railroad used on the engines that pulled their premier passenger train, the Southern Belle, from Kansas City to New Orleans. Then the train disappeared from the timetable in 1969, but in 2009 KCS started painting newer locomotives in the scheme very similar to that of the Southern Belle, after years of having gray ghosts like we saw earlier, or white ghosts. Locomotives just painted white with a big red KCS on the side. They kept the newer Southern Belle scheme until the merger in 2023.
Thank you so much for watching. For the New River Network, I'm Lucas Berry reminding you that anytime is train time.